first personal story ever told, and it's called My Grandmother's Garden. My grandmother's yard was the garden spot of Flora, Indiana. I used to trail around behind her. She'd be out there cutting a bouquet of flowers to take to someone from her church, and I'd ask her the names. What are those purpley blue ones? And she'd say, well, those are hydrangeas. And the white ones right next to them, they're hydrangeas too, but we always call them snowballs. She had so many beautiful flowers. There were red and pink rambling roses. There were daylilies in yellow and orange, tiger lilies that prowled beneath the maple tree. There were snapdragons and big-headed pink peonies. My grandmother called them peonies. They smelled like heaven. In the springtime, there were tulips, yellow and orange and red. And there were hyacinths that smelled so sweet, daffodils. But my favorite flowers of all the ones that grew in my grandmother's garden were the iris. And in Indiana, they bloom in early June. And I loved to go out when we were visiting on a cool spring morning. I could hear the morning doves cooing. And I'd peek into that secret chamber that the upper petals of the iris make, and I'd smell that sweet perfume that wafts like incense to heaven. I learned a lot of things in my grandmother's garden. I learned about the beginnings of life. My grandmother, in addition to being a magnificent gardener, was also a soft touch. And my grandfather was a butcher, and so he would bring home all my grandmother called them innards, anything that he couldn't sell, the innards, he would bring home, and my grandmother would chop all that stuff up, and she'd mix it with whatever table scraps she had, and she'd put it out as a smorgasbord for all the stray cats in Flora, Indiana. Well, where there are stray cats, there is stray cat romance. And I can remember lying on the Davenport with the window open on a summer night, listening to the cats sing their arias of passion. Row! 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 And 8 weeks later, there would be kittens. And my grandmother would tell my brother and I, now you all just sit on the back steps and hold still. If you go chasing after the kittens, they'll run away. So my brother and I'd sit there really, really quiet. And pretty soon, a little kitten would poke its head out from the daylilies. Now one summer when I was 12, my cousins, my aunt and uncle and my cousins visited from Seattle. My cousin Bobby was 2 years older than me. He was 14, he had long hair, he cussed, he sassed his parents, he smoked cigarettes out behind the old cinder block garage. He was a bad boy, and he thrilled me to my core. But you know, even my tough guy cousin was a soft touch like the rest of the family. And so that summer, he and I found a litter of kittens that had been abandoned by the mother cat. We begged my grandparents to help us save the kittens. And my grandparents had moved to town from the farm, and they had a more realistic attitude about animals than we did. But finally they gave in. My grandpa went to see Doc Shipsides, who was the town vet, and he brought some kitten formula, and my cousin Bobby and I took turns feeding those kittens. I wish I could tell you that they all made it. They didn't. And I don't know who cried more, me or my tough guy cousin. So I learned about the end of life, too, in my grandmother's garden. Now, when I became a teenager myself, Well, I can remember being there during the summer and just kind of flopping on the couch. I am so bored. And my grandmother said, honey, be quiet. Luke is just waking up. He's had amnesia, and he doesn't remember that he's married to Laura, and now she's taken up with another fella, and his nurse has fallen in love with him, and they're about to announce who the baby's father is. I rolled my eyes because I knew after General Hospital, which is what my grandfather called it, after they watched that, they would watch my mother's soaps, The Edge of Night and The Secret Storm. So I got up and I went outside into the garden. Truth is, I was having my own little soap opera. I had a huge crush on a boy from church, but he was one of the popular kids and he didn't know I was alive. So I wandered out there amongst the geraniums and the snapdragons, and I made up a song for him. I want you, take off your laughing mask and show me the man who's buried deep inside, 'cause I can hear him yelling, screaming, let me out, let me out. I've got to breathe. Oh, that for a 15-year-old with pimples. Well, eventually I did find the right man. And, well, my grandpa died, and my grandmother moved into a retirement home, and they had to sell the house. Well, by this time, I had 2 boys of my own, and we traveled with my parents to help them clean up the house before they sold it. And I took my boys out into the garden. I said, see those purpley blue ones? Those are hydrangeas. And the white ones are hydrangeas too, but we call them snowballs. And it was all I could do to keep from crying. I didn't want to sell the house. I didn't want him to sell my garden. But I knew they had to. Well, on my grandmother's 90th birthday, I went back to Indiana again. We were having a big party at the retirement home, and all these cousins that we hadn't seen in years and years and years came, and it was really wonderful. And after the party, my mom said, would you like to go by and see the house? I hear that the people who bought it have really fixed it up. I said, sure. So we drove over there and we parked, and sure enough, the house looked great. They had put new siding on it. The last time I'd seen it, the porch was starting to sag, and that looked great. They'd even put siding on the old cinder block garage. But when I looked at the yard, I just gasped. Everything was gone. Even the maple tree. The whole yard was covered with pea gravel. We just sat there in stunned silence. But finally, my mother said, well, I guess it's a good thing I did what I did. I felt kind of guilty about it at the time, but what did you do, Mom? Well, before we sold it, I dug everything up. I dug up the hydrangeas, I dug up the peonies, I dug up the tulips, and I dug up all the others, and there are so many of them that I still have a box in the garage. Would you like some of the bulbs? And so now, every spring, my grandmother's iris bloom in our yard. I am not the gardener my grandmother was. My husband's a great gardener. I am not. But fortunately for me, iris proliferate like stray cats. And so now on a spring day, I can go out into my yard. We even have some mourning doves in our neighborhood. And I can peek into that secret chamber that those upper petals of the iris make, and smell that sweet perfume that wafts like incense to heaven. And it's almost like I'm back in my grandmother's garden again.